The rope was already around her wrists when Samuel Sullivan rounded the corner of the bathhouse with an armful of cedar planks, and the sight of it made him drop every single one. "That's quite enough," he said, though his voice cracked on the second word, because 6 men from the Miners' Rest had a 9-foot orc woman on her knees in the mud of Asheville's market square, and she was still fighting them, blood at her lip, her tusks bared in a snarl that should have sent every one of them running for the hills. They had a chain looped through the rope at her wrists now, and one man, a broad-shouldered teamster named Dobbs, had his boot pressed against her spine to keep her down. "Stay out of it, Carpenter," Dobbs said without even looking at him. "This is clan business, bounty business. She's an outcast, no clan to answer to, no law to protect her. Church says vagrants get run out of town, and orc vagrants get sold to whoever's paying." Samuel looked at her then, really looked, past the mud and the blood and the fury, and saw a woman with skin the deep green of river moss, and dark eyes that were not begging for help, not even now, but blazing with a promise that she would remember every one of their faces. Her leathers were travel-worn, a fitted vest of dark hide laced tight over a body built like a temple column, snug leather trousers tucked into boots gone soft with wear, all of it a size or two too loose now from however many days she'd gone without a proper meal. Her black hair was cropped rough at the shoulder, like she'd cut it herself with a hunting knife rather than let anyone else near her with a blade. "She hasn't done anything," Samuel said. "I've seen her sleeping in the church ruins for 2 weeks now. She doesn't bother anyone." "She's a monster wearing a woman's shape," said another man, and spat near her boot. "Bounty's good coin from the Ridgeback clan. Says here," he waved a folded paper, "Uget Grimtusk, outcast of the Ridgeback, 500 silver to whoever delivers her alive to the clan war camp at Stonefall Pass. Her own kin want her worse than we do." At the sound of her name, the woman's head came up, and for the first time she looked at Samuel instead of through him, as if surprised that a human had bothered to learn anything about her at all beyond the shape of a threat. Samuel Sullivan was not a large man. He was broad through the shoulders from 20 years of hauling timber and swinging an adze, his hands scarred and calloused, his brown hair perpetually dusted with sawdust, but he stood maybe 5 inches shorter than Uget Grimtusk, even folded down on her knees in the mud. He had no sword. He had a carpenter's hammer on his belt and a coil of rope meant for lashing planks, and he stepped between 6 armed men and their prize anyway, because something in him simply would not let this happen in the square in front of the church he had spent 3 years quietly, patiently rebuilding stone by stone. "You'll not sell a person like a sack of grain in this town," he said. Dobbs laughed. "She ain't a person, Sullivan, she's an orc." "She bleeds like one," Samuel said, nodding at her split lip. "And she's got a name, which is more than I can say I know about half the men drinking at your table most nights. Let her up." For a moment nothing happened at all, the whole square holding its breath, steam drifting up from the hot spring vents at the edge of town where the boardwalks crossed over bubbling mineral pools, the smell of sulfur and pine thick in the cold morning air. Then Dobbs's boot came off her spine, not out of mercy, but because 6 armed men measuring themselves against one carpenter with a hammer still didn't want witnesses for what they were about to do, and old Mother Elwyn from the trading post had come out onto her porch to watch, and so had half the street. "Bounty's still good," Dobbs said, backing off a step, chain still looped loose in his fist. 500 silver, Sullivan. You want to buy her freedom. You go on and find that kind of coin, because until then she's a fugitive with a price on her back, and sooner or later somebody's going to collect. They left the chain coiled in the mud when they went, a small, ugly mercy, and the crowd dispersed muttering, and Samuel Sullivan crouched down in front of a woman who could have snapped his neck between 2 fingers and offered her his hand. She did not take it. She got up on her own, slow, deliberate, water and mud sluicing off her leathers, and stood a full head and a half above him, and looked down at him with an expression he could not read at all. "You should not have done that," she said. Her voice was low, roughened, carrying the accent of the eastern mountain clans, each word bitten off clean. "You have made yourself their enemy for nothing. "Wasn't for nothing," Samuel said. "Wasn't going to stand there and watch. You do not even know me." "I know you sleep in my church," he said, and something almost like a smile ghosted at the corner of her mouth before she remembered herself and smoothed it away. That was the first time Samuel Sullivan saw Uget Grimtusk, on her knees in the mud of Asheville's Market Square with a bounty on her head and blood on her lip. And it was the moment he decided, without quite admitting it to himself yet, that he was not going to let anything else happen to her while there was breath left in him. Asheville sat in the belly of a volcanic valley, hemmed in by black rock ridges that vented steam like slow-breathing giants. Its main street built along boardwalks that crossed a dozen natural hot springs, the whole town smelling of sulfur and pine smoke, and in the mornings, fresh bread from the bakery near the mill. It was a rough, hardy sort of place, full of miners and trappers and the occasional caravan merchant passing through on the mountain road, and it had exactly one church, half its roof caved in during a rockfall some 6 years back, the rest of it standing in patient, crumbling ruin at the edge of town where the pines grew thick, and the ground was uneven with old graves nobody tended anymore. Samuel had been rebuilding that church, slow and unpaid, ever since his father died and left him the mill and the carpentry shop, and a loneliness so large it had its own weather. He liked working with his hands. He liked the smell of good cedar and the particular silence of a church at dusk, and if anyone in town thought it strange that a millwright spent his evenings hauling stone for a roof that would take him a decade to finish, they mostly kept it to themselves, because Samuel Sullivan was well liked, if a little quiet, if a little too used to being alone. He had noticed the fire pit first, 3 weeks back. Small, carefully banked, tucked behind the one wall of the nave still standing tall enough to break the wind. Then the bedding, a nest of dried bracken and an old cloak, hidden behind the altar stone where the roof still held. He'd known someone was sleeping there. He had simply never expected to find out it was an orc woman, alone, with nowhere else in the world to go. That evening, after the crowd in the square had drifted back to their suppers and their gossip, Samuel walked out to the church with a wool blanket under one arm and a second bundle wrapped in oilcloth, and found Uget sitting with her back against the broken altar stone, watching the door with the flat, ready stillness of someone who expected to be run off again before the night was through. "You're still here," he said. "Where else would I go? It was not a question. Your friends made it clear enough what this town thinks of me. They're not my friends." He set the blanket down a careful few feet from her, not close enough to crowd her, close enough that she wouldn't have to reach far. "Figured the nights get cold this high up, even with the spring steaming half the valley. Brought you a blanket. There's bread and some salt pork in the cloth, too. Not much, but it's what I had." She stared at the offering like it might be a trap, dark eyes narrowed, and then at him, and something in her posture eased by a fraction, though her voice stayed hard. "You expect something for this. I don't expect anything. Everyone expects something." "Well," Samuel said, settling himself on an overturned block of stone a respectful distance away, because his knees ached and it seemed rude to loom over her even if looming over her had never once been possible. "I expect you're wrong about that, at least where I'm concerned. Figured a person ought to have a blanket. Figured you ought to eat. That's the whole of it." She was quiet a long moment, the wind moving through the broken rafters above them, somewhere in the dark a night bird calling. Then she reached out slow and pulled the blanket toward herself and unwrapped the bread and ate like a woman who had not eaten properly in days, tearing the bread with her teeth, tusks catching the low light. "You did not ask my name," she said between bites. "Heard it in the square, Uget Grimtusk. You did not ask why there is a price on my head. Figured you'd tell me if you wanted me to know." He shrugged. "Not my business otherwise." She looked at him for a long moment, longer than was comfortable, the kind of look that peeled back skin and looked at what was underneath, and Samuel made himself hold still for it because he had the strange, certain sense that this was a test, and that failing it would matter more than he could yet understand. "Most humans," she said finally, "cannot stop themselves from asking. It is the first thing out of their mouths. What did she do? What is she running from? Is she dangerous? Are you? Very, she said, and this time the smile did not stop itself, sharp and quick and startling in its beauty there and gone. But not to you, carpenter, not tonight. Name's Samuel, he said. Samuel Sullivan. I know, she said. The whole square was shouting it. He laughed, surprised into it, and for a moment the ruined church felt less like a ruin and more like the beginning of something, though neither of them said so, and Samuel left her the blanket and the last of the bread and walked back to his small house above the mill with his chest strangely full, and did not sleep well, and did not mind it. He came back the next night, and the night after that, always with something small, a second blanket, a tin of salve for the split lip that was healing slow, a wedge of hard cheese, and always he asked no questions. And always she watched him with that same careful, weighing look, as though she could not quite believe a man kept showing up expecting nothing in return. It was on the fifth night that she finally told him, unprompted, staring into the small fire she'd built in the pit behind the altar stone, her knees drawn up, her voice flat in the particular way of someone reciting an old wound, so it would stop hurting to say it aloud. I was war band second to my mother before this, she said. Grimtusk clan, Ridgeback territory, 3 days ride north into the high passes. I killed a man who did not deserve killing. My own cousin Vok, who thought because he was chief's son he could put his hands on me whether I willed it or not. Her jaw worked. The elders called it murder. My mother called it shame upon the clan. They stripped my name, cast me out, put a price on my head so that I could never come back and never be safe anywhere else either. Because outcast blood is worth good coin to any clan looking to make an example. Samuel sat very still, the fire popping between them, and did not say anything for a long while because he understood with a carpenter's plain instinct for what a thing was built to bear, that this was not a moment for him to fill with words. He's dead and you're not sorry, he said finally, and I don't think you should be. You do not know what I am, Samuel Sullivan. She said his full name like a challenge, like she expected it to make him flinch. I have killed more men than you have fingers on your hands. I am an outcast with a price on my head in 6 clan territories and half a dozen border towns. I am not a stray dog you can feed scraps to and tame. Never thought you were a dog, Samuel said. Reckon you're the least tame thing I've ever met. Doesn't mean you don't deserve a blanket. She looked at him across the fire, and something in her face cracked open just slightly, just enough, and she said, low, almost reluctant, "No one has asked me what I deserve in a very long time." "Well," he said, "I'm asking." "I deserve," she said slowly, testing the words like they might bite her, "to not be hunted for the rest of my life for refusing to be someone's property. Then that's what I hope you get." She was quiet, and the fire burned lower, and eventually she reached across the space between them, not quite touching him, just close enough that her hand rested near his on the cold stone, and neither of them moved away. And that was the first night Samuel Sullivan let himself believe that whatever this was, it was not going to be simple, and it was not going to be small. Word traveled fast in a town the size of Asheville, and it was not long before half the market square knew that the carpenter was feeding the orc squatting in the church ruins. And opinions on the matter split about as evenly as opinions on anything ever did in a border town, raised on old war stories and older grudges. Mother Elwyn, who ran the trading post and had buried a husband in the war 20 years back, cornered Samuel by the flour barrels one morning with her arms crossed and her mouth set in a thin line. "You know what she is, Samuel Sullivan. You know what her kind did to this valley before the treaty." "I know what some of them did," Samuel said. "Same as I know what some of us did back. Doesn't mean I know what she did, because I do, and it isn't what you think. She's got a bounty on her from her own clan. That doesn't happen for nothing." "She killed a man who tried to force himself on her," Samuel said, quiet but hard, and watched Mother Elwyn's face shift, some old anger of her own surfacing behind her eyes, because she had buried more than a husband in her life, and some griefs cross every line drawn between peoples. You want to tell me that's a crime worth hunting a woman across 6 territories for? Mother Elwyn did not have an answer for that, and after a moment she pressed a sack of dried apples into his hands without a word, and told him gruffly to make sure the orc woman ate something sweet once in a while, and Samuel walked out of the trading post with his throat tight, understanding that this was how change happened in a place like Asheville, not in grand declarations, but in small, grudging kindnesses passed hand to hand. Not everyone came around so easy. Dobbs and his friends from the Miners' Rest made a point of walking past the church ruins at odd hours, loud, deliberate, letting Ugek know she was watched, and twice more men came through town asking after the bounty notice, sniffing around for information, and each time Samuel found some reason to be seen with her in daylight, walking the boardwalk together, sharing a meal at the edge of the square, not to provoke anyone, but because he had decided, somewhere in that first week, that he would not let her hide like she had done something wrong. "You are making a target of yourself," Ugek told him one evening, sharp with something that might have been worry dressed up as irritation. "If men come for the bounty, they will not politely ask you to step aside a second time." "Let them come, then," Samuel said, and did not look up from the plank he was sanding, one of a stack he'd hauled up to the church that week, ostensibly for roof repairs, though they both knew it was as much excuse as purpose. "I'm not going to hide you like you're something shameful, Ugek. You've done nothing wrong. You cannot stop 500 silver with a hammer, Samuel." "No," he agreed. "But I can stand in front of you while you figure out where you're going next, if that's what you want. Or I can just keep bringing blankets if that's easier." She was silent a long moment, watching him work, the fading light catching the green of her skin, the fierce, wary intelligence in her dark eyes. "Why," she said finally, "do you keep doing this? You have nothing to gain from it. You risk your name in this town, your safety. For an orc outcast who cannot even promise you she will still be here in a month." Samuel set down the plank. He looked at her, really looked, the way he had that first day in the mud, and found that the words came easier than he expected, because he had been turning them over in his mind for 2 weeks now, in the quiet hours at the mill, in the long walks up to the church each evening. "My father built things," he said. "Mills, barns, roofs, things meant to last past him. Taught me that a thing worth building is worth building slow and worth building right, even if you don't live to see the whole of it finished." He shrugged, a little helpless. "I don't know how to explain it any better than that. I look at you and I don't see something broken that needs fixing. I see something worth building toward. I don't need a reason beyond that, Ugek. I just know I want you here." She looked away first, out toward the darkening tree line, and when she spoke her voice had gone rough in a different way than before. "No one has ever said such a thing to me. My whole life I was the strongest, the fiercest, the one no one dared cross, and no one ever once said they simply wanted me here." "Well," Samuel said, "I'm saying it now." She crossed the space between them then, slow, deliberate, and this time when she reached for him it was not a hand resting near his on cold stone. She caught his jaw in one broad, calloused palm, tilting his face up to hers, and for a moment they simply stayed like that, her towering over him, him steady and unflinching beneath her hand. And then she kissed him, hard and sudden and hungry, tusks catching faintly at his lip, and Samuel Sullivan, who had spent years being the quiet, overlooked carpenter at the edge of every gathering, found himself kissed by the fiercest woman he had ever known, like she had been waiting weeks to do it and could not wait one moment longer. When she pulled back, breathing hard, she looked almost as startled by herself as he felt. "That," she said, "was not part of the blankets and the bread." "Didn't hear me complaining," Samuel managed, and she laughed, low and real, a sound he had not heard from her before, and something settled between them that night that neither one tried to name, but both of them carried forward like a warm stone kept close against the cold. 2 more weeks passed, and in that time Asheville grew almost used to the sight of them together, the carpenter and the orc woman, walking the boardwalks past the steaming springs, sharing meals at the edge of the square, and if some still looked away or muttered, more had begun to simply nod, because Samuel Sullivan was well liked and had never once in his life given anyone real cause to doubt his judgment, and because Ugek Grimtusk, whatever else she was, had not raised a hand against a single soul in Asheville, and that, in a town that valued deeds over rumor, began to count for something. It was in the fourth week that the challenge came, and it came the way trouble in Asheville always seemed to come, loud, public, and impossible to walk away from without losing something that mattered. There was a fighting ring at the edge of the market square, used mostly for wrestling matches between miners settling debts or bragging rights, a wide circle of packed dirt ringed with old crates and barrels for seeding, and once a season a caravan of traveling fighters came through the mountain pass looking for coin and glory, and this season's champion was a mountain of a man named Bram Kessler, broad as a doorway, arms like cordwood, undefeated in 11 towns across 3 territories. And he arrived in Asheville 2 days after the first snow dusted the Black Ridges, looking for a challenger and finding, instead, an opportunity. "Word's out about your orc, Carpenter," Bram said to Samuel in the square, loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear, a cruel grin splitting his beard. 500 silver bounty on her head, and here she is walking around free as you please. Man could make himself rich just by winning a fair fight. "There's no fight here," Samuel said, stepping forward though his heart was hammering, because Bram Kessler outweighed him by 100 pounds and had a sword belted at his hip besides. "Wasn't talking to you, little man." Bram's eyes slid past him to Ugek, who had gone very still beside him, dark eyes narrowed, reading the crowd, the exits, the shape of the trap closing around them. "Talking to the Outcast. Ridgeback clan bounty says alive, no mention of unharmed. Rules of this ring say challenge fair fought and won, winner takes the prize. You fight me, orc, and win, I walk away and never bother you again, my word on it before this whole square. You lose, I collect my 500 silver and you go back to your clan in chains, and this little carpenter's got nothing left to defend but an empty church." The crowd murmured, hungry for spectacle in the way crowds always were, and Samuel felt something cold settle in his stomach, because he knew with terrible clarity that Ugek could not simply walk away from this challenge, not with her pride, not with the whole town watching, not with him standing beside her as the reason she'd stayed this long instead of running further into the wilds where no one knew her name. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly, close to her ear. "We can leave tonight. Head for the coast, somewhere no bounty notice has reached yet." "And run for the rest of my life," Ugek said low, "while you give up your mill, your church, everything you have built here because I could not stand and fight one overgrown fool in a dirt ring." She shook her head, already unlacing the outer edge of her vest to free her shoulders, rolling the tension out of her arms like a woman preparing for exactly this her whole life. "No, Samuel, I have run enough. I am done running." "Ugek, trust me," she said and looked at him, and there was no fear in her at all, only a fierce, blazing certainty that took his breath away. "Or do you not think I can win?" "I think," Samuel said, "you could put that man through the church roof if you wanted to. I'm not worried about you losing. I'm worried about what happens if this goes wrong in some way neither of us can plan for." "Then watch," she said, "and know that I do this because I choose to stand, not because anyone forces me to." And she stepped into the ring. The crowd roared as she entered, a sound half hunger and half disbelief, because whatever people in Asheville had grown used to seeing her as quiet, careful, feeding scraps at the carpenter's side, none of them had seen this. The outcast warrior stripped down to her fitted leathers, shoulders bared to the cold mountain air, muscle coiling beneath green skin. Dark eyes gone flat and focused in a way that made even Bram Kessler's grin falter for half a second before he covered it with a laugh too loud to be entirely convincing. "Rules are simple," the ringkeeper called, an old miner named Fitch who'd overseen 100 matches and never once seen anything like this. "First to yield or first knocked from the circle. No blades. Winner takes the terms agreed. Samuel stood at the edge of the crowd, hands clenched so tight his knuckles ached, and watched the woman he loved square off against a man twice his own size, and found that his fear for her was matched, exactly and equally, by something fierce and proud rising in his chest, because he had never in his life seen anyone move the way Ugek Grimtusk moved when Fitch dropped his hand and the fight began. Bram came in heavy, a fist like a hammer swinging for her jaw, the kind of blow that had ended 10 fights in 10 towns before this one. And Ugek was simply not there when it landed, ducked low and inside his reach, and drove her shoulder into his ribs with a crack that Samuel felt in his own chest from 20 feet away. Bram staggered, roared, swung again, and this time she caught his wrist, twisted, used his own considerable weight against him in a throw that sent him crashing into the crate barrier hard enough to splinter wood. The crowd's roar shifted, disbelief curdling into something wilder, and Bram came up bleeding from a cut above his eye, no longer smiling at all, and charged her with the full weight of his fury. And Ugek met him head-on, no fear in her at all, trading blows that would have shattered lesser bones. Until finally, in one motion that the whole square would talk about for months afterward, she caught his charging weight, pivoted on her back foot, and drove him down into the packed dirt with a throw so complete that the ground itself seemed to shudder, and put her knee against his throat, and looked out at the stunned, silent crowd with her chest heaving and blood on her lip and something like triumph blazing in her dark eyes. "Yield," she said to Bram Kessler, "or I finish this." Bram Kessler, champion of 11 towns, undefeated across 3 territories, tapped the dirt twice with an open palm, and the square exploded into noise, half of it disbelief, half of it a wild, unwilling admiration, and somewhere in the middle of it Samuel Sullivan was already climbing over the crate barrier, heedless of the crowd. And Ugek rose from the dirt and turned and saw him coming and met him halfway, and he threw his arms around her, careless of the blood and the dirt. And she laughed against his shoulder, breathless, fierce, alive. "Told you to trust me," she murmured into his hair. "Never doubted you for a second," Samuel lied, and she pulled back enough to look at him, to see the lie plain on his face, and laughed again, and kissed him right there in front of the entire square, tusks and blood and dirt and all. And the crowd, for once, did not mutter or look away, but watched, and some of them even cheered. That night back at the church ruins, with a fire built high against the cold and Bram Kessler's humbled retreat still the talk of every table in town, Samuel pressed a cool cloth to the cut on Ugek's cheekbone, and she let him, sitting still and pliant in a way she rarely allowed herself, watching him with an expression that had softened past wariness into something unguarded. "You could have been hurt far worse," he said, voice rough. "I have taken worse hurts training with my mother's war band before I could walk a full season," Ugek said, but gently, understanding the fear beneath his words. "I am not made of glass, Samuel Sullivan. I know that." He set the cloth aside and let his hand rest against her jaw, thumb tracing lightly along the sharp line of it. "Doesn't stop me from being afraid for you. No one has ever been afraid for me before," she said quietly. "Afraid of me always, never for me." She caught his hand against her face, held it there. "It is a strange thing to be wanted whole instead of simply feared or used. I do not entirely know what to do with it." "You don't have to do anything with it," Samuel said. "Just let it be there." She was quiet a moment, firelight dancing across her features, and then, slow, deliberate, she drew him toward her. And this time when their mouths met, it was not hunger alone, but something deeper, warmer, a claiming that went both ways. Her hands careful despite their strength as they found the collar of his shirt, his fingers tangling in the dark, rough-cropped edges of her hair, and the fire burned low and neither of them moved to build it higher, content instead in the heat they made themselves. And later, wrapped together beneath the blankets he had first brought her weeks ago, Ugek Grimtusk pressed her mouth to his temple and murmured something in the old clan tongue that she did not translate, though from the way she said it, low and fierce and certain, Samuel understood it well enough anyway. Spring crept slowly up the volcanic valley. the snow retreating from the black ridges in patches, the hot spring vents steaming harder against the cold mountain air, and life in Asheville settled into something Samuel had not dared hope for only months before: ordinary, warm, whole. Ugek had moved from the church ruins into the small house above the mill, not all at once, not with any grand declaration, but by degrees, a second blanket left folded at the foot of his bed, then her boots by his door, then simply herself, filling a space in his life he had not realized was so achingly empty until she filled it. The church ruins remained important to them both regardless, and on clear evenings they still walked out to it together, and Samuel kept rebuilding the roof, plank by plank, and Ugek had taken to helping him haul stone, laughing at how carefully he measured everything twice before he cut it. "A tree does not measure itself twice before it grows," she teased him once, watching him check a beam's length against his marks for the third time. "A tree also falls down in a strong wind," Samuel said. "This roof isn't going to." "No," she agreed, looking up at the half-finished rafters, sunlight slanting through the gaps that would eventually be closed against the weather. "It is not." She had begun to be known around Asheville for more than the fight in the ring, though that story only grew taller with each retelling at the Miners' Rest. She helped haul timber down from the ridge for Samuel's mill work, strength that no team of horses could match, and she'd taken to sparring with a few of the younger miners who'd screwed up the courage to ask, teaching them footwork that had nothing to do with brute strength and everything to do with reading an opponent's weight. And slowly, the way ice gives way to spring not all at once but in patient, persistent thaw, Asheville began to think of her not as the orc in the church ruins, but as Ugek, who fought like a storm and laughed like sudden sunlight, and stood at Samuel Sullivan's side like she'd been carved to fit there. Mother Elwyn took to setting aside the sweetest dried apples for her without being asked. Fitch, the old ring-keeper, told the story of her fight with Bram Kessler to every traveler who passed through, embellishing it a little more each time until it had grown into something almost like local legend. Even Dobbs, grudging and slow about it, had stopped his pointed patrols past the church ruins, though he never quite managed to look Ugek in the eye without some old discomfort crossing his face. It was not, Samuel knew, that every scar of prejudice in that town had healed. Some old miners still crossed the street rather than pass too close to her, and there remained always the bounty notice, 500 silver, still valid, still hanging like a blade over both their heads no matter how ordinary their days had become. But something had shifted, something real, and Samuel let himself believe, for the first time since his father died and left him alone with a mill and a half-built church and no one to come home to, that he had found the thing he had been quietly, patiently building toward his whole life without ever quite knowing its shape. He should have known better than to trust a spring that quiet. The riders came down from the high passes on a morning thick with fog rolling off the hot springs. 6 of them, mounted on sturdy mountain ponies, orc warriors in full war leathers, the banner they carried marked with the crossed tusks of the Ridgeback clan. Samuel heard the commotion from the mill and came out with sawdust still on his hands to find the whole of Asheville's Main Street gathered in uneasy silence, watching the riders draw up in the market square, watching the woman at their head dismount with the cold, deliberate grace of someone used to absolute authority. She was tall even for an orc, older than Ugek by a decade or more, her leathers heavier, marked with the rank scars of a war chief, and when Ugek came out from the mill house at Samuel's side and saw her, her whole body went rigid, every line of her drawn tight as a bowstring. "Mother," Ugek said, and the word came out flat, wary, stripped of any warmth. "Daughter," said the war chief of the Ridgeback clan, and her dark eyes swept over the gathered townsfolk, over Samuel standing close at Ugek's shoulder, over the whole strange, quiet scene of an outcast living openly among humans who had, by all rights, every reason to fear her. "You have made yourself very comfortable for a woman with a price on her head. Say what you came to say, Mother." Ugek's hand had found Samuel's without either of them quite deciding it, a grip that spoke of old fear rising fast beneath the surface calm. You did not ride 3 days from Stonefall Pass for a family visit. The war chief's gaze settled on Samuel then, cold and assessing, and Samuel made himself hold still under it, the way he had held still under her daughter's first weighing look all those months ago. "This is the human," she said, not quite a question. "This is Samuel Sullivan," Ugek said, and something fierce came into her voice, a warning plain as a drawn blade. "He is mine, mother, and if you have come to threaten him, know that I will not stand aside for it, clan or no clan." "I have not come to threaten anyone." The war chief's mouth twisted, something that might have been distaste or might have been an old, buried grief, hard to tell beneath the scars and the years. "I have come because the elders grow restless, and because your cousin's father has never stopped demanding your blood price be paid in full, and because a bounty of 500 silver draws bounty hunters from every border town between here and the coast, and sooner or later one of them will succeed where I have not, and drag you back to Stonefall Pass in chains regardless of what I wish." She paused, and something in her rigid posture seemed to falter, just slightly. "I did not ride here to collect you, Ugek. I rode here to warn you. There is a hunting party 3 days behind mine, sent by Vok's father, and they will not offer you the courtesy of a fair fight in a dirt ring." The square had gone utterly silent, every soul in Asheville straining to hear, and Samuel felt the ground shift under everything he had thought was settled, because a warning was not a threat, but it was not safety either. "Why warn me at all," Ugek said low, "when you cast me out yourself?" "Because I am your mother," the war chief said, and for a moment, just a moment, the cold authority in her voice cracked wide enough to show something raw beneath it. "Before I am war chief of anything, and I have spent every night since your exile wondering if I made the wrong choice, casting out a daughter for refusing to let a man take what was not his to take." She looked away, out toward the black ridges, jaw tight. "The bounty was not my doing, I could not stop it being placed, but I have kept it from being collected these 6 months by turning back 3 hunting parties myself. I cannot turn back a 4th. "Then what would you have me do?" Ugek's voice cracked on the question, old wounds surfacing raw and sudden. "Run forever, hide in ruins for the rest of my life." "There is one way the blood price can be lifted," the war chief said slowly, "and it is the reason I risked this ride at all, to bring you the chance of it before Vok's father's hunters do something none of us can undo. The clan elders have agreed, if you submit to a formal trial of challenge at Stonefall Pass and win it fair before witnesses, the blood price is paid in full and the bounty lifted forever, no matter who calls for your death after. It is the old law. It has not been invoked in 2 generations, but it is real and it is the only door left open to you. And if I lose?" The war chief did not answer and did not need to, and the silence stretched long and terrible across the market square. "There is a price for the challenge itself as well," the war chief added finally, quiet now, almost gentle in a way that sat strangely on features carved for command. "The elders will only grant the trial if something of equal weight is offered as surety, proof that this is not some desperate gamble but a true claim of honor. A hostage of standing, held at the war camp until the trial's outcome is decided. If you win, he is freed unharmed, honored guest of the clan. If you lose," she stopped. "No," Samuel said immediately, before Ugek could even open her mouth. "I'll go. Samuel, I said I'll go." He turned to face her fully, ignoring the war chief, ignoring the whole watching square, his heart hammering but his voice steady. "You said it yourself, Ugek. You're done running. So am I. If this is the only door, then we walk through it together and I stand as your surety and you fight your trial and we end this for good." "If I lose," Ugek said, low, anguished, "they will kill you, Samuel." "Then you'd better not lose," he said, and managed, somehow, a small, crooked smile, though his hands were shaking at his sides. "I've seen you put a man twice your size through a crate barrier. I don't think losing's much in your nature." She stared at him, torn between fury at the risk and something so tender it looked almost like pain. And finally, slowly, she pressed her forehead to his, ignoring the entire watching square, ignoring her own mother, ignoring everything but him. "If anything happens to you," she said, "I will burn Stonefall Pass to the ground and every clan in it." "Nothing's going to happen to me," Samuel said, with far more confidence than he felt, "because you're going to win." They rode out 3 days later, Samuel mounted on a borrowed pony beside Ugek's much larger clan-bred mare, the war chief's party ahead and behind them like an honor guard that was also, unmistakably, a cage. Asheville had gathered to see them off, more of the town than Samuel expected, Mother Elwyn pressing a sack of dried apples into Ugek's hands with fierce, wordless instruction to eat something sweet before any fight, Fitch clasping Samuel's shoulder and telling him, gruffly, that he'd best come back to finish that church roof because nobody else in town had the patience for it, and even Dobbs at the edge of the crowd, giving Samuel a short, grudging nod that was as close to an apology as the man was likely ever to manage. The ride into the high passes took 3 days, climbing steadily out of the steaming valley into thinner, colder air, past black rock ridges veined with old snow, until they came at last to Stonefall Pass, a war camp of hide tents spread across a wide natural amphitheater of stone, smoke rising from dozens of cook fires, orc warriors turning to watch the strange procession arrive. A human man riding openly into the heart of Ridgeback territory beside the outcast daughter of their own war chief. Samuel had never in his life felt so watched, so entirely out of his depth, and he kept his spine straight and his chin up anyway, because he had promised Ugek he would not flinch, and he intended to keep that promise even if his stomach was busy trying to climb out through his throat. They took him that first night to a tent at the edge of the camp, not unkind but firm, 2 guards posted at the flap, and Ugek was allowed exactly a moment to say goodbye before she was led away to prepare for the trial, held under a different, heavier watch befitting the accused. "Whatever happens," she said, gripping his face in both her broad hands, forehead against his, "know that these months were the truest thing I have ever had. Whatever the elders decide, whatever comes of tomorrow, you gave me something no one else ever did, Samuel Sullivan. You gave me a reason to stop running." "You're not losing tomorrow," Samuel said fiercely. "You hear me? I don't care what trial they've built. I've seen you fight. I've seen what you are when everything's on the line. You're not losing." "No," she agreed, low, fierce, and kissed him hard, desperate, before the guards pulled her gently but firmly away. "I am not." Samuel did not sleep that night, sitting instead at the edge of his guarded tent, watching the cook fires burn low across the amphitheater, listening to the low murmur of a whole war camp readying itself for a trial 2 generations forgotten. And when dawn broke gray and cold over the black ridges, he was led out with the rest of the camp to the wide stone floor of the amphitheater, where the elders had gathered on a raised outcrop of rock, and where Vok's father stood at the front of the assembled clan. A broad, scarred orc with cold eyes and a hunting party of his own men flanking him, clearly hoping the old law would fail so he could collect his blood price by other means. Ugek stood alone at the center of the stone floor when they brought her out, stripped down to fighting leathers, the same fitted vest and travel leathers she had worn since the day Samuel first saw her kneeling in the mud, though now there was no mud, only cold gray stone and 1,000 watching eyes. And when she looked out across the crowd and found Samuel's face among the guards holding him at the amphitheater's edge, something in her posture steadied, settled, found its center. "The challenge is called," the war chief announced, her voice carrying flat and formal across the stone, though Samuel could hear beneath the ritual cadence the raw fear of a mother watching her daughter walk toward a fight that might kill her. Ugek, once of the Grimtusk line cast out for the killing of Vok, son of Hagen, claims trial by challenge to lift the blood price upon her. Hagen, as father of the slain, may name a champion to stand against her. Should she prevail, the price is lifted forever before all witnesses. Should she fall, the price is paid in full, and her surety forfeit besides. Hagen stepped forward, and Samuel's stomach dropped, because the champion he named was no ordinary warrior but his own eldest living son, a mountain of an orc named Grosk, broader even than Bram Kessler had been, a veteran of border raids with a reputation, murmured through the crowd, for having never once lost a challenge fight in 15 years. "You cannot be serious," Ugek said low to the war chief. "Grosk has killed men twice his own size in the border wars." "The law permits any champion the accuser names," the war chief said, and Samuel heard, this time unmistakable, the fear beneath her formal words. "I am sorry, daughter. I cannot change the rule, only watch you meet it." Ugek's eyes found Samuel's again across the stone floor, and he saw for just a moment something close to doubt flicker behind them, the first he had ever seen from her, and he understood with sudden, desperate clarity that she needed something from him now more than she had ever needed anything, not a blanket, not a kind word over a fire, but simple, unshakable belief. "Ugek!" he called out, and the guards at his side stiffened but did not stop him. "Look at me," she did. "You put Bram Kessler through a crate barrier in front of half of Asheville," Samuel shouted, his voice cracking with the effort of being heard across the amphitheater, but steady, sure. "And I watched you do it without one flicker of doubt in your whole body. You are the strongest, fiercest, most impossible woman I have ever known, and I did not ride 3 days into the mountains to watch you talk yourself into losing before you've thrown a single blow. Fight like you fought for me. Fight like you fought for yourself." "I'm not afraid, Ugek. I trust you completely." Something in her spine straightened, the doubt burning away as fast as it had come, replaced by the same blazing certainty he'd seen the day she stepped into Fitch's dirt ring, and she turned back to face Grosk, and rolled her shoulders loose, and settled into a fighter's stance that made even the watching elders lean forward with interest. The fight, when it began, was nothing like the ring in Asheville. Grosk fought with the brutal, economical violence of a man who had killed for real stakes many times over. No showmanship, no wasted motion, and for the first several exchanges Ugek gave ground, testing him, absorbing blows that would have ended lesser fighters, blood welling at her cheekbone, at her lip, her breathing rough, and Samuel's whole body screamed at him to look away and could not. But he saw, too, what the crowd did not, that she was learning him with every exchange, the same patient reading of weight and reach she used sparring with the young miners back home. And when Grosk finally overcommitted to a heavy overhand blow meant to end the fight outright, Ugek was simply not where he expected her to be, ducked low inside his guard exactly as she had against Bram Kessler months before. And this time, when she drove her shoulder into his ribs, something audibly cracked. And Grosk staggered, and the crowd's roar shifted from bloodlust to disbelief. She did not let him recover. She caught his overextended arm, twisted with her whole body behind it, and threw him bodily across the stone floor, and before he could rise she was on him, knee against his throat exactly as she had done in Asheville's dirt ring, and the entire amphitheater fell utterly, breathlessly silent. "Yield," Ugek said, voice ragged but carrying clear across the stone, "or I finish what you started, Grosk, son of Hagen." Grosk, bleeding, humbled, tapped the stone twice with an open palm. The silence held a heartbeat longer, and then broke into an uproar unlike anything Samuel had ever heard, half the crowd roaring in shock and grudging admiration, Hagen himself standing rigid and furious but unable, before the whole assembled clan and the ancient weight of the invoked law, to deny what had just happened. "The trial is decided," the war chief announced, her voice thick with an emotion she was fighting visibly to keep formal, "before all witnesses. The blood price is lifted. Ugek, daughter of the Grimtusk line, walks free, and any bounty upon her, in this clan or any other bound by this law, is void from this hour forward." The guards at Samuel's sides released him without needing to be told, and he was running before he'd fully decided to, across the cold stone floor, and Ugek turned from the fallen Grosk and saw him coming and met him halfway exactly as she had in Asheville Square. And this time, when he threw his arms around her, there was no crowd's disapproval to brave, only a whole war camp watching, stunned, as the outcast they had hunted for 6 months laughed. wild and free, and unburdened for the first time in longer than either of them could say, and kissed the human carpenter who had walked willingly into the heart of orc territory as her surety, and never once doubted her. "I told you," Samuel murmured against her hair, laughing too now, half from relief and half from something too large for his chest to hold. "You weren't losing today." "You did tell me," Ugek agreed, breathless, blood and dirt and triumph all mixed together on her face. "And I have decided, Samuel Sullivan, that I am going to make a habit of believing you." The war chief approached them then, slower, and something in her rigid bearing had eased, decades of formal authority softening into something more uncertain, more human, standing in front of the daughter she had cast out. "I do not expect forgiveness," she said quietly, "and I do not ask for it. But I am glad, more than the law required me to be, that you stood before this whole clan and proved what I always knew and could not say aloud when it mattered. You were never the shame of this clan, Ugek. You were only ever punished for refusing to be someone's victim." She paused, glancing at Samuel with something that might cautiously have been respect. "And you have found, it seems, a man who understood that better than any of us did." "He brought me blankets," Ugek said simply, "and asked no questions. He gave me a reason to believe I deserved to stop running before I ever believed it myself." She took Samuel's hand and did not let go, even standing before the entire assembled Ridgeback clan. "That is worth more to me than any clan's approval, Mother, but I am glad all the same to have it." They stayed 3 more days at Stonefall Pass, long enough for Grosk's ribs to be seen to and for the formal seal of the elders to be placed upon the lifted bounty, written into clan record so that no bounty hunter, no border town, no distant clan could ever again claim silver for Ugek Grimtusk's capture. Hagen did not offer an apology, but he did not raise the matter again either, and by the old law's binding could not. And Samuel watched Ugek walk through the war camp on the second day with her chin high and her shoulders loose in a way he had never seen from her before. A woman finally, fully unburdened. On the last night before their ride back down to Asheville, Ugek's mother sought them out once more, this time alone, without the trappings of formal authority, and pressed something small into Ugek's palm, a carved bone token on a leather cord, marked with the crossed tusks of the clan. "This does not mean you must return," the war chief said, awkward in a way that suggested she had not practiced tenderness in a very long time. "I know your life is elsewhere now, and I have no claim upon it, and did not, perhaps, earn the right to hope for anything from you at all. But it means, should you ever wish it, there is a door open here that was not open before. And it means, whatever else stands between us, I am proud of the woman my daughter became, even in exile, even alone, even before she found someone who saw it too." Ugek closed her hand around the token, and for a long moment did not speak, old grief and old anger and something new, something almost like healing, all warring plainly across her face. "Thank you, Mother," she said finally, quiet, and it was not everything mended, not all at once, some wounds too deep to close in a single conversation after 6 months of exile, but it was a beginning, honest and unforced, and Samuel, watching, thought it was exactly enough for a first step, with more steps, surely, still ahead of them both. They rode back down out of the high passes as spring finished its slow work on the valley below, the black ridges shedding their last patches of snow, the hot spring vents steaming soft and constant against air gone gentle and warm. And Asheville, when they finally rode back into the market square, turned out nearly in full to greet them. Word of the trial at Stonefall Pass having outraced them down the mountain roads by way of trader gossip and traveling merchants. Mother Elwyn was first to reach them, pressing a full basket of dried apples into Ugek's arms without a word, her eyes suspiciously bright. Fitch clasped Samuel's hand so hard it ached, already halfway into planning how the story of the trial would be told at the miners' rest that very evening, no doubt considerably embellished by the third telling. Even Dobbs came forward awkward and extended a hand to Ugek, which she took, after a measuring pause, with something that might cautiously have been the beginning of respect between them. "Bounty's lifted for good, then," Dobbs said gruff. "For good," Ugek agreed. "You will have to find some other way to make trouble for me, Dobbs." "Reckon I'll manage," he said, and there was, unmistakably, the ghost of a smile beneath his beard, and it was as close to peace as that particular old grudge was ever going to get, and it was, Samuel thought, watching it, more than enough. They walked out to the church ruins that evening, just the two of them, leaving the noise of the square behind, and found the fire pit behind the altar stone exactly as it had always been, and Samuel built a fire there out of old habit, and Ugek settled beside him with her back against the same broken stone where she had told him, months ago, the whole aching truth of why she had nowhere left to go. "The roof's coming along," Samuel said, looking up at the rafters, more than half closed in now against the weather, sunset light slanting gold through the remaining gaps. "Another season, maybe two, and it'll be whole again." "You have been saying that for 3 years, Samuel Sullivan," Ugek said, amused, leaning into his shoulder. "I begin to think you enjoy having an excuse to keep coming back here." "Maybe I do." He wrapped an arm around her, drawing her closer, and she let him, settling against him with a contentment that still, some days, seemed to surprise her, as if she had not fully believed until recently that she was allowed this, allowed to simply rest against someone and trust that she would not be asked to leave. "This is where I found you. Figured it was worth finishing properly." "You found me on my knees in the mud of the market square," she pointed out. "This was only where you brought me blankets afterward." "Same thing, near enough." He kissed the top of her head, breathing in the smell of wood smoke and pine that always seemed to cling to her. "This is where it started, whichever way you want to measure it. Seems fitting to finish the roof here. Give us somewhere whole to come back to once it's done." "Us," Ugek repeated, testing the word. "Us," Samuel agreed and turned to face her fully, taking both her broad hands in his, feeling, as he always did, the strange, wonderful contrast of her strength held gentle for his sake. "I know I'm not much to look at next to a war chief's daughter who put down a champion twice in 1 year. I know I'm just a carpenter with a half-finished church and a small house above a mill, and I know you could have anyone, any clan, anywhere, choose you in a heartbeat if you let them. But I've never wanted anything the way I want you to stay, Ugek, not as a favor, not out of gratitude for a few blankets and some bread. I want you here because I love you, plainly and completely, and I don't think I'll ever stop." Ugek was quiet a long moment, firelight dancing warm across her features, and when she spoke her voice had gone rough with an emotion she did not try to hide. "I have been chased across 6 territories, Samuel Sullivan. I have been feared, hunted, cast out, and named a monster by my own blood. And in all of that, in all those months alone in this ruin with nothing but a fire pit and a stolen cloak, I never once let myself hope for anything as simple and impossible as this." She lifted his hand, pressed it flat against her chest, over the steady, powerful beat of her heart. "You did not save me, Carpenter. I want you to understand that. I saved myself. Every single day I chose to keep fighting instead of giving up. But you gave me somewhere worth surviving for. You gave me blankets and asked no questions, and you kept giving every single day after until I forgot how to imagine a life without you in it. I love you. I am not leaving. Not for my clan, not for any bounty, not for anything this world could offer me instead." "Good," Samuel said, voice thick, "because I wasn't planning on letting you." She laughed, that same wild, real sound he had come to treasure above almost anything else in the world, and pulled him close, and kissed him there in the golden last light beneath the half-finished roof of the church where she had once slept alone and afraid. And this time there was no hunger of desperation in it, only certainty, only home. They married that autumn, not with any grand ceremony, because neither of them had much use for pageantry, but in the church ruins themselves, the roof finally, fully closed against the weather after one final push of frantic, joyful work that had half of Asheville turning up to help once word got around what the finished roof was for. Mother Elwyn organized the flowers. Fitch, insufferably proud, told the story of the trial at Stonefall Pass one more time to anyone who'd stand still long enough to listen. Even the war chief rode down from Stonefall Pass for it, alone, without her honor guard, and stood at the back of the small gathered crowd and did not speak much, but stayed the whole ceremony through, and that, from a woman who had spent a lifetime guarding every feeling behind formal duty, was its own kind of vow. Ugek wore her same fitted travel leathers, cleaned and mended for the occasion, because she had told Samuel plainly that she saw no reason to dress as someone she was not even for her own wedding, and Samuel had laughed and told her he wouldn't have wanted her any other way. And when she walked toward him beneath the newly whole roof of the church that had sheltered her first, alone and outcast, and now sheltered them both together chosen, there was not a soul in Asheville who doubted, watching them, that they had built something meant to last. Afterward, as the small gathering spilled out into the golden autumn evening, laughter and old grudges alike finally, fully laid to rest beneath the steam rising soft from the hot springs at the edge of town, Samuel Sullivan looked at his wife, fierce and beautiful and utterly, wonderfully his, and could not remember for the life of him what loneliness had ever felt like. "No regrets, Carpenter?" Ugek asked him, arms looping easy around his neck, laughter still bright in her dark eyes. "Not one," Samuel said, "not a single one." "Good," she said, and kissed him again, right there in the wreckage-turned hole of the church where it had all begun, "because I intend to keep you a very long while yet." And beneath the black ridges of the steaming valley, in a town that had learned, slowly and imperfectly and completely, to make room for both of them, Samuel Sullivan and Ugek Grimtusk laughed together in the golden light, home at last, and never once alone again.